Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Paramita and I heartily welcome you to my channel Paramita PM. If you are new to my channel, then I would request you to go through the content of my channel, look at the videos, and if you really find those videos helpful and if they really heighten your interest, then do like it, share it, and do not forget to subscribe to my channel. And most importantly, please turn on the notification bell button so that you get notified whenever I upload any new videos on my channel. So now, without any further ado, let's get into the lecture. In this audio lecture, we shall discuss the significance of the final chapter or chapter 6 of Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own. In this chapter, we find the narrator waking up from her sleep and she watches London appears to be very indifferent to literature. The day was 26th October 1928 and she finds that London appears to be indifferent to literature in general, to women and fiction, and it doesn't seem to care much about even Shakespeare's plays. And then she keeps on watching people in the street, and suddenly she notices that a man and a woman together get into the same cab, and their coming together appeared to be very difficult. So far she thought that these two genders are separate, and she also felt that her mind was also separate from the rest of the existence. So suddenly she wonders, what this unity of the mind means, because mind always keeps on changing its focus. So this very image of the man and woman satisfying, because here the mind contains both a male part as well as a female part. And in order to have complete happiness and complete satisfaction, she concludes that these two parts must live in harmony. So there must be a harmonious existence of the male part as well as the female part. And suddenly she concludes that the genders like men and women, they were supposed to work together, and whether it's a man or a woman, each has a man's nature and a woman's nature. Because sometimes a man thinks from the perspective of a woman just as a woman. What does that imply? It implies that each individual, each gender has a man's nature as well as a woman's nature. So both these powers dwell in us, one male and one female. And here in this context, she recalls what the great romantic English poet said. Samuel Taylor Coleridge, the great mind is androgynous. And this is the fusion that Samuel Coleridge talked about. And Coleridge never meant that the androgynous mind, would always always favors women. Rather, if one has an androgynous mind, it is found that this kind of favoritism is much lesser than the single-sexed mind. Because if a writer has an androgynous mind, then it is able to transfer or transmit emotion without any obstacle, without any impediment, and it becomes naturally creative, incandescent, as we already came across this term, which means free of obstacles, and It is undivided. So Shakespeare is considered to be to be a fine model of this androgynous mind. Though she also says that at the present age, it is very difficult to come across an androgynous mind, because everyone is very, very, uh, s- let's say, sex conscious. And then we find the narrator picking up a novel by a well-respected male writer, and while she went through that novel, she found that the writing was very vivid, it was strong, and it also indicated had a free mind. But later on she finds that he protests, saying that the equality of the other sex, where he's protesting against the equality of the other sex, whereby doing which he tries to assert his own superiority. And immediately the narrator understands that this is a great obstacle. Okay, and this obstacle is a destructive one. An androgynous mind, partial approach, rather it would be free of obstacles, it would be undivided, and it would be able to to transfer or transmit emotions without any obstacles. So here the narrator, he blames both the gender, he blames both the genders, both sexes, both male and female, for having this self consciousness of gender, that I am a man or I am a woman. So it is not that it is only women who are conscious of their gender, or it is only men who are conscious of their gender. So the narrator blames both the sexes for being so sex conscious, and then she judges the androgyny of various famous writers. Therefore, the idea that comes to us here from the narrator is that a writer's mind is purely male or female. If a writer's mind is purely male or female, and if there is no freedom of thought, if it is full of obstacles, then writing will never be fertilized. So, writing will never be fertilized. So, one should have an androgynous mind having both male and female parts, and it should be incandescent at the same time, free of obstacles, and it should be undivided. There shouldn't be any division in the mind. And it is this particular state of mind that can help an individual become a flourishing or a prosperous writer. And here, she also says that with the suffrage movement, when when the suffrage movement took place for women's voting rights, it made men defend their superiority, defend their rights. And she says that due to this women's movement, what happened, male authors now began to have less androgynous brains, because they became more and more a defensive of their maleness, and they became more and more aware of their maleness, which means they became more sex conscious. Thereby they failed to have androgynous, like full androgynous brains. And so she says that is why men now are right, since they fail to have an androgynous state of mind. And it is at this point that the role of the narrator comes to an end. She ends her thoughts concluding that it is really dangerous for any writer who writes while thinking about their sex. And here Woolf takes over the speaking voice, and that Mary Peyton has portrayed her thoughts as to why a woman must have 500 pounds and a room, all this stuff, to write fiction or poetry. As far as Woolf is concerned, Woolf is concerned, she disapproves, she disapproves of evaluating men's writing against that of women, or, making or passing judgments between the two. She keeps on, although she, defends the narrator's insistence that women should have money, women should have material things, saying that 500 a year stands for these material things are a necessity for women to write, because it is only then that they will have that intellectual freedom. So if they do not have a private room of their own, if they do not have a private room of their own, if they do not have those material things like money of their own, then they will never have that intellectual freedom, because it has been seen that down the ages, since they had no privacy of their own, they couldn't write. So since the very beginning, women have been poor, and it is this poverty that prevented women from becoming writers. So this idea that or let's say this continuous insistence on a woman's need for material things is defended by Woolf, because she also supports it. Then sums up her argument, saying that intellectual freedom depends upon material things, and poetry also depends upon intellectual freedom. And it is not that 200 years, it is not that only for 200 years merely women have been poor, but since the beginning of time, women have been poor. Okay, and that's why she defends herself, her view, saying that that's why she has been, stressing since the very beginning. She has been stressing on money, and on having money and a room of one's own. And finally, she, urges her audience, that is now her audience is women. So she motivates women to struggle to have finance and a private room of their own. And she says that if these conditions are provided to women, then Judith Shakespeare will be reborn. And here in this case, like when Woolf started speaking, she says that she, while defending herself, that why she has been emphasizing so much on material things, because and that the mind should be, should have the capability to overcome this poverty. And this gives a professor's argument, where she says that top poets of the last century were all educated. Like 3 were all but except 3 were well educated. And she repeats again that without this, one cannot have intellectual freedom, and that is why women have not been able to write great poetry, because they did not have that intellectual freedom. And then finally, she also responds, to the question as to why the narrator, as to why she insisting that women's writing is very, very important, because all the books that she had read, all the genres that she has gone through, have disappointed her. And she's also pointed her. And she also points out that, good writers are good human beings, because only when they are able to connect to reality and only when they are able to communicate this sense of reality to the readers. And therefore, she encourages women to have themselves, to be themselves, to retain their, essence and be themselves. And she also reminds them of what men have always thought of women. And she says that Judith Shakespeare lives within all women. And if women are given money and privacy in the next century, she will be reborn.